The Overwatch World Championship Series playoffs have concluded this past week, and in it we got to see the best players in the world compete utilizing the new perk system and hero bans to see a variety of team comps go head-to-head. While ultimately the terrifying Mauga comp didn't seem to be the be-all end-all, the commitment that teams had to play the very difficult dive composition against it was very interesting to me. The perks meta offers some power-ups throughout a match, changing the considerations of how you play the game. Prior to perks, ult economy and min-maxing your advantage on the objective was always the best option, but because there's a perks meta, you in theory could play for a stronger team comp later in the match with the expectation of winning the game later, as the tier ranking of individual heroes and as well a team comp might change based on the characters being at level 0 or level 3. Mauga is the sharpest, most all-in type character there is, with hard counter matchups that either make the enemy tank explode, or we witness him exploding. Not the favorite design of the competitive community, but gives us a lot to think about and learn from the pros as they're working out these top meta comps in real time. I think most players assume Mauga counters Winston, which seems pretty obvious when the Winston fights the Mauga directly and gets his face blasted by a character that self-heals and anti-tanks. Certainly, in any instance where your tanks need to fight head-to-head in a brawl, there's an advantage going to these Overwatch 2 style characters that have lots of buttons and are just very brawly and sustainable. But this round on Village showed a great example of the peak power of Ana and Winston as a combination. While Mauga is most threatening against the enemy tank, his matchups against squishies take a bit more finesse. He has to land a precise slam to be truly threatening against most squishy characters. Because of that, Winston actually manipulates the squishy battle much easier, with a bubble to block out a lot of their value and really easy, reliable damage to zap them down, even through some key defenses like Genji's Reflect. What the Ana comp wants to do ideally is have Ana be safeguarded by the center of the map, preferably on like a high ground angle with some cover so she can't easily be aggressed on, have her team run crowd control on the perimeter, she launches her value out towards the pathing lanes for the enemy, and they go clean up the anti-kills and punish the sleeps. In this first defending fight, the enemy Mauga actually successfully all-ins against the Ana. And as we can see, even though it in theory is kind of playable based on a numbers advantage, as soon as that Ana dies, the Winston cannot engage the Mauga at all, so he wins the map. While maybe you could think about clutching with your Primal Rage, it is such a risk to go up against the double cannons of Mauga and the potential threat of Cage Fight that you shouldn't do that. And while Lucio Juno has merit for those characters individually, lacking the Kiriko is going to be a nightmare for Kuffa trying to hold or retake space into the Ana. The Ana comp should have the biggest struggle retaking into space because Ana is vulnerable and slow, a backliner sniper character, but they use the sound barrier to close the distance, and trading a damage for a support is definitely an up trade with this comp because you're funneling most of your resources into your Winston anyway. Getting Ana into position creates the hard rock, paper, scissors counter pick against the Mauga, and now he's screwed. In most instances, the Winston comp is afraid of the Mauga, but once the Ana is protected, then the Mauga is vulnerable, especially when there is no Kiriko for some reason. Well, I don't know why they're not picking it. It's not banned. That would change this entirely because now we get the ideal setup where the Ana is far in the back and can launch safely the utility abilities, nade and sleep at the pathing doorways, meaning that either the tank will struggle to close the distance to get into the backline, or the squishies trying to clear through the choke can get cleaned up by the Winston. Everyone's under threat. The squishies never even can get out. Unsure where the Winston's going to pounce at any moment. A beautiful multi-nade hits the Winston and the enemy tank. You can just see how powerful the Ana-Winston combination is when they're holding the map already, and the enemy doesn't have the proper retake utility. It's not like Mauga offers any kind of defense up against the Ana nade herself. No ways to manipulate line of sight, no cleanses, no shields. In theory, the Mauga tanking the anti would be an uptrade if they had a Kiriko to cleanse it, but they don't. Okay, that's how the Ana comp looks when it's succeeding the best. Nightmare hadn't been playing the Mauga comp all that time, and maybe felt incentivized to play it after they had such a rough time on this map against Timeless. They actually prefer putting Ultraviolet on Ana because he is so skilled. He does tend to outplay the enemy Mauga as well. But here, Timeless's Mauga comp with lots of zippy characters, Timeless's comp is extremely survivable. When you start to consider often when the enemy is diving you, it's based on movement cooldowns. If they get your cooldowns out, they can punish, but if you trade movement cooldown for movement cooldown, you'll probably always keep away. And in those instances, the team that has the higher up trade tank will often win. Because if Mauga can play keep away, he will slowly win over time because his damage and cooldowns are simply stronger than the Winstons. Now keep in mind, Nightmare goes on to win the playoffs. So despite them losing with the Winston comp here, they are the best team, at least for now in the perks meta in NA. So it might even be the case that they correct some of these issues that I'm going to point out here. But part of the problem they have is despite Ana's nano boost feeling extremely powerful in our ranked games, in more organized team play, ultimates like Kiriko and Juno's ult get far more value because their area of effect and affect your whole team, which means you don't need a precise character to pop off with that ability. And if somebody gets traded out unevenly, or if it's not a perfect setup, it's especially easier on these modes where it's more about just fighting on the objective. When the map is more important than the objective, then the Ana comp with Winston looks a lot better because they can take the fight where they need to. But these more simplistic area of effect abilities like Mauga's Shout or Juno and Kiri ult, placing them on the point and just winning on the objective matters so much more on a mode like Flashpoint, where it's possible to win on the objective even if you lose in the frag battle. Let's highlight some issues that the Ana comp has failing to execute, particularly in the ult fight. Nightmare's at a bit of an ult disadvantage here. Drop the beat could have countered the enemy's overclock. It doesn't. The Ana gets sniped, which essentially means the entire fight is over. But if you look at the other ults in play, a problem that you have is Mauga deals so much damage over time and sustains in his position that he can overwhelm an enemy sound barrier. Winston has no ability to do that. At best, his primal could disrupt the enemy, but up against cage fight, you can't do that. So they trade in sound barrier to lose to two ults rather convincingly. But we should expect that. If Ana goes down, the whole comp falls apart. But they're going to try to nano a few different targets here. Okay, mutual nano comes out. Zera is actually winning the Tracer battle, but can't get the one clip against the recall, then turns the corner to see a Kiri ult and a Mauga shouting inside it. What does our nano boost kill here? Is there even a target we could ever kill? Good shots onto the Kiri, but thanks to the cooldown reduction in Kitsune Rush, she's got a Suzu available, which is going to area of effect protect against the Tracer all in, and we just sort of slowly lose the point because of this. What the Winston comp would have needed to do is find a way to go take this fight off of the objective, because the benefit Nano has is if it's on the target, that target can maneuver in and out of the fight. Dodge the fight while retaining the effects if you wanted in theory, whereas Kiri ult, if let's say they had to pop it to escape out of their spawn, well, you can choose to run from that. They gain nothing. As opposed to here, even when you're evenly trading, the Kiri ult is eventually winning the objective. They can't stay on it because their comp is designed to dodge the Mauga and his Shout to have any chance to win. They only kill him when the Ana can anti him, but that's difficult when Suzu's available. So you have to constantly be playing aggressive to set the tempo to drain those cooldowns out just to have a chance to win. And the part of the problem with that with Ana is she doesn't run around the map. She's slow. So as crazy as a double nano seems, it does not seem that impressive up against some of the other support ults that are out there. And the problem is once you make that small mistake where you're supposed to win, nano and sound barrier working up to a pulse should be able to beat one Kitsune Rush. But because it doesn't, they lost that objective and are going to be predicted to lose the next fight up against a war chest of ultimates from Timeless. Again, and I can't stress enough, it would be advantageous if Nightmare could ever find a way to take fights against the Mauga comp off of the objective whenever possible, because what you want them to do is use their deployment ultimates like Cage and Kitsune Rush off of the cart so they're not gaining objective progress while using it. And with the combination of a pulse bomb on the Mauga and headshots and railguns and overclock, they eventually work down the enemy Mauga. Meanwhile, the Kitsune Rush is still all here, so any player on the enemy team standing in it near the objective is getting their cooldowns again. And this fight where it looked like Nightmare had an advantage, spending to use to win, just doesn't get enough punching power out of their ultimates again. And I think a big percentage of it is just the nature of how these ults work. Kitsune Rush is just more valuable than Nano Boost if you're brawling on the objective. Even so many years later, with other supports taking the reins away from Kiri in some ways, Kitsune Rush is still an insane ultimate. As the majority of that fight, it alone beat 2 ults again, and then the overclock comes back. From watching the games, I was a bit shocked at how many low-value nanos there were, but it makes sense when you start to think about how the perks meta has power crept the game, especially in regards to mobility. Sojourn extra slide, Tracer extra blinks, Mauga as a character, while is vulnerable to disables, has a 6-second charge across the map cooldown, which is uninterruptible. Kiri and Lucio already were evasive and got improved tools with perks as well. So especially in the cases where the Ana team was expecting to use nano to make some space, locking anything down meaningfully was just not going to happen, which I do think is an adjustment that can be fixed. But when you start to see the difference that a primal attempts to have up against a sound barrier and the upside potential that Mauga could have up against that same sound barrier, you start to realize the value output of Mauga is kind of immense. Here's a fight that should break the heart of any Winston player. Cage fight onto the Winston, but Nano does help him tank it, and he times the Primal Rage extra health late into the cage, allowing him to break the cage in fact, as well as frag and pop off. But later into the fight, unfortunately, Mauga is still a threat always, every second up against the Winston, so he just gets mowed down. And so this fight that should be a huge win, they barely have any members alive to set up that defensive Ana pole position that they need in order for the comp to be maximized. Ana wants a vantage point, safety, and throwing lanes. What's crazy is how good she actually is, but being kind of held back just by the nature of the game modes and maps that we have. They're wide open, lots of flank lanes, a lot of movement. If we had more static style maps and Ana could position safely, her value would be immense. But due to the nature of these newer Overwatch 2 game modes especially, there's almost no character that gets picked with no mobility options. Consider that. That's how good Ana is to still be even considered while not being able to move. I don't know, guys. I think there should be an Ana wall climb perk. Like, come on. Let's just make it happen. For a little extra credit here at the end of the video, I will note, of course, that the teams in NA at least did start to overcome the Mauga comp. Nightmare did win the grand final after all. Through a bit of trial and tribulations, understanding this a bit better, here on Route 66 was one of the most masterful displays of outplaying the enemy cage. But you can see how on a map like Payload, where you're able to establish everybody in the positions you want, then on top of that, Ultraviolet this time isn't on the Ana, but is on Juno. Of course, that's because Ana's banned, but in a way, you can see how Juno ult, in my opinion, is just straight up better than Nano. Granted, Nightmare here has an ult advantage, 3 ults versus 2, but we've already seen that the Mauga anti-tank tactics have been so severe before that he's been able to uptrade in the ult fight, but not in this instance. I'm not even sure if the orbital ray hits him right here. I can't tell if he's getting healed from it or not. I think the ray could have been even better placed, but Cuff on the Ram decides to take the aggro, block with Ramatra Forever, popping Annihilation Form late into the fight to gain armor health and more block, Sound Barrier late, and with so much offense getting pumped into the Ram, remember this entire time the enemy tank isn't contesting the enemy DPS. That's the major difference between these main tank style tanks versus a Mauga. Mauga's mediocre against squishies, has some plays to frag them out, but it's not the same thing as putting a shield in their face. Winston can dive them, Ram can run them down with Nemesis. Mauga's design is strange, where he most easily farms the enemy tank, so much so that Space Station here is going to swap off of the Mauga to mirror the Ramatra. Now, ironically enough, I actually think it's the case that Mauga is a very high skill character, at least when you have to outplay his counters. Because if you don't outplay his counters correctly, he just explodes instantly and you're just feeding your tank away. Also, the skill to actually have carry impact by slamming into things and managing everything, aiming, the way they've rebalanced him him is in a very skillful way for the most part, albeit he does retain some of the very easy and brain-dead anti-tank mechanics that he's had before. But actually winning the game with Mauga is a bit harder than it seems, especially as the things that we highlighted in today's pro analysis video are things that the teams could outplay, I think, once they really figure out the order of operations on how to do so. What do you guys think of today's pro analysis video? Let me know in the comment section down below. Do you want to see more videos like this? If so, be sure to leave it with a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. I've been Frito. I'll see you guys next time.